and employees that have completed that probation. So based on their feedback, that would be my recommendation to the board, that we would implement this salary schedule for food service. And so, for example, assistant cooks, those cooks that are still on probation would be placed at step 1. And those employees that have been here 2 years or more, meaning they have successfully completed probation, would be placed on step 2. So similarly, you'll see that for the next category of staff. For our administrative assistants and our custodians, that we would similarly place people, and I should back up a little bit. So we would look at what people are currently making, and everyone would receive at least the 5.93%. So we do have a few folks in this category that would be what we call off schedule. So with 5.93%, they would be making more than step 2. And so for those employees, at least for step 1, they would get that 5.93%, and then we would keep talking about part 2, which I'll explain in a moment. So for our admin assistants and our custodians, we do a similar implementation where people would be placed on step 1 if they were in their probationary period, and step 2 if they had completed their probationary period. And so I should also mention that if you switch roles in our district, that it would start over. So for example, if you've been a paraprofessional for 5 years and then you would become an administrative assistant, that we would place you on step 1 because you would need 2 years in that new position. Because then luckily we have wonderful paraprofessionals that then become wonderful admin assistants, but it isn't always the case. So if it's a new job, that period starts over. So for those folks that have been in the role more than 2 years, they would be placed on step 2. Now for our paraprofessionals, we did have a salary schedule for paraprofessionals already, and so we are proposing to make a modification to that schedule. So for our paraprofessionals in special education or in our health room, that we would now have 4 levels. Currently, we only have 3 levels. What we have heard over the past few years is that our paraprofessionals who have associate's degrees would like their education to be recognized. So we would propose for special ed that if they have the special ed license and are in a special ed position, that they would start at $20 an hour. And then we would pay a little bit more if they had an associate's degree or a CNA and they obtained their substitute teaching license. The district does pay for that and helps them with that process. That is really helpful to us because then if we do have a classroom vacancy that we're not able to fill, that they can fill in and sub for us. So if they're willing to do that, we're willing to pay a little bit higher rate. Then we do pay higher if they have that sub-teaching license and they have a bachelor's degree or they are an RN. And then we pay more if they have a teaching license or they're bilingual. Similarly, in regular education, we'd have the same categories. So to be a regular education paraprofessional, you don't need a license. So if you're serving in that role, then it would start at $18 an hour, and then you have a similar progression. So we would be proposing to add the associate's degree to that schedule as well. So in terms of our next step, one of the main pieces of feedback that we received is that people who have been here a very long time would like us to recognize that. And we are very grateful that people have chosen to spend their careers with us. And so we wanted to look at some way that we could show them that we do value that and that we honor their service to our district. And so I'm reluctant to do that by adding steps to the salary schedule because it just doesn't let us pay people the most we can over time. And with the market, we're just really seeing an increase in starting salaries for various positions. So it's hard for us to balance the two and be fiscally responsible. So we would like to keep talking with staff to find ways that we can honor their service to our district and show we appreciate them without doing something that honestly isn't in their best financial interest long term in terms of having a really long schedule. And so we would like to keep talking with them about that. We have some ideas, but I think it's really important to include their voice in that conversation. So what we would like to do is ask the board to approve this as step 1 tonight. And again, talked about going back to the start of July 1 for full year staff and then back to that August 22nd professional development date for school year staff, with the note that we don't do summer school retroactively because those books are already closed for that. And then we want to continue the discussion with our staff about how to honor them and encourage them to have longevity in our district. And then most importantly, we are part of a consortium with other area HR directors where we share all of our salary and wage data every year in January. And that is put all into a big database. And then in February, we're able to access that. So we would like to re-examine wages in February. There are many of our neighbors that also passed referendum. And so we don't know yet what they're going to do with wages, and we want to make sure that we're competitive, especially as we get into spring and we start hiring for next school year. So we would like to revisit this in spring if possible to start talking about wages for 23-24. So we consider that really part 2 to talk about what will wages look like in 23-24 and letting employees know that as soon as possible, and then also bring some ideas back to you about how to honor longevity. So with that, Dr. Bergstrom, what would you add?
Just want to underscore the point you made about how this is part 1 and that there's an important part 2 that will be coming up in the spring after we have additional data. And hopefully that will be about what more we can do. And I think that's an important point for people who are listening to understand.
Okay, so a lot of information there. Again, we are just focusing on the hourly staff at the moment. So I think I'll go around the room to see if anybody has any. Actually, we need a motion on the table first, correct?
Yes,
so,
thank you.
It's been recommended that we pass this proposal. And so I'm open to a motion to have more discussion about this. We need a motion and a second, and then we will discuss, and then we will be looking for a vote of approval.
I would make a motion to recommend approval of the hourly wages that have been presented to us this evening.
Anna, the motion, thank you. Is there a second? Leslie, thank you. All right. So we will go into discussion about it. I'd like to start with Mary just so I don't forget her here. Mary, I'd like to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Tim. I did have a couple of clarifying questions. Gina, the group that we're talking about, specifically the paraprofessionals, does that include the paraprofessionals that we employ at the 4K programs as well?
Thank you. Yes. So for our 4-year-old kindergarten sites, if there are students in the 3 or 4-year-old program that have an IEP that need assistance, yes, we provide the paraprofessional for those sites.
Thank you. And I know you mentioned that we participate in a consortium and that everyone will be pulling salary information as we move forward. Do we have any ideas as to, have any of the other districts clarified what they're doing for salaries, specifically around the positions that we're talking about tonight? Do we have any insight into that?
So in our last few meetings, we've mainly talked about paraprofessionals in special education because that seems to be a challenge for many of us to recruit. And the consensus on my last call is that people were moving to at least $20 an hour to see if that would help fill those positions. So that is why you see that reflected in our proposal in Appendix B. When I had talked to the Madison School District, because they don't participate in our consortium, they were aiming to be higher than that, at least for $22 an hour. I don't, but they have a very long salary schedule. So it'll be interesting to see where everyone ends up. But that is where the HR directors felt that they needed to be to at least have an opportunity to recruit.
Okay. And can you remind me, do we currently have paraprofessional openings?
Yes, we do. So
Okay.
if you know anyone that would be interested, we are happy to take referrals.
Excellent. And so in your opinion, and I know you've done a lot of looking at numbers, the paraprofessional salaries that you are recommending for the board to consider, do you think those are likely to be competitive, sufficient to attract?
I hope so. We are in the process of hiring 2 paraprofessionals, and we've had this discussion with them. And so both of them did accept, knowing that some type of increase was coming, although we couldn't tell them exactly what it would be. So I hope that it's already working, that they know they were disappointed in our current rates, but have taken the job with the idea that at least a 5.93% increase was coming. So I'm
Okay.
hopeful what that means for the future.
And then one last question for you. Can you just give me a sense of the type of training that we hold our paras to? How quickly they're supposed to complete their training, that sort of thing?
So for paraprofessionals that we hire in the beginning of the year, they participate in the professional development dates similar to our educators. The training is a little different, but they are here on those days. And so they are offered orientation training by district office and then building specific training in the building. Our paraprofessionals who are in special education need to take our nonviolent crisis intervention training. We also offer that to our other paraprofessionals as well. And we are talking about making that required for all of our staff. In addition, then the buildings offer professional development throughout the school year. And I would say the last few years we've really focused on equity and on how to more effectively address student behavior.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I also appreciate the note that if we undershoot, we can reassess in the spring. I appreciate that we need to find the right balance, and it's obviously a shifting landscape with all the referenda that have occurred, and the majority of them in our neighboring communities have passed. So we obviously don't want to undershoot the salaries because we would risk losing staff. But we also don't want to overshoot because we, as you already spoke to, we have a number of other educator groups that we need to discuss compensation for. So I do appreciate that component of the slide presentation. And with that, I don't have any more questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. Troy, do you want to go next?
Gina, is there any other feedback of note from the discussion with staff other than what you already described about kind of the desire? There was some desire to increase the steps.
That was the main theme. We did have an excellent question from some of our paras in regular education as to why we are paying special education more, and it's a higher increase for special education. And so a great discussion with lots of ideas. We committed to continuing that conversation. What I explained to them is really a function of the market, that other districts do pay more for special education, and that is where we have our vacancies right now. It is service that we're required by law to provide, not to mention that our students really need it. And so we have wonderful paraprofessionals in regular education, and we're all a team, and we all contribute to student success. And I understand that. Right now, it's really where I think we need to be to try to attract people to those positions. And they are just different types of positions sometimes. You are doing, depending on the student, more care for a student. You might be helping the student with feeding or medication, or going to the bathroom, things like that. That our paras in regular education don't routinely do. Now they do help us, and they are helping right now to fill in for those vacancies. And so I did let them know that if they are performing in those roles, that we will pay the higher wage rate. So I appreciate that very much. And that is something that we may have to look at in the future. And we had some ideas about that. So that is, I think, the difficult part of this is that we all are part of a team, and we contribute to the success of students, and also that there are differences in the market that we're competing with.
My next question is, I know that we continually do market rate calculations, and we're continually monitoring other districts so that we can remain competitive. And we were doing that pre-referendum in order to determine the amount that the referendum was going to ask for. So I assume that the overall budget impact of this proposal is within the amount that's been allotted to this staff classification for the referendum increases.
It is, yes. And so Andy and I have been doing a lot of calculating because not only do I know what the budget is, but also, want to reassure the community that we're only doing what we feel is needed to accomplish the goals we stated in the referendum.
Okay. And then my last item is just really more of a comment, I guess, regarding the long-term incentive for retention that you'll be looking at in the spring. I just have seen in the private industry that there's a lot more businesses that are moving towards bonuses that will account for that incentive for years of service, say a 5, 10, 15-year bonus at the end of that period of time to incentivize that retention. So just something I guess I've noticed in the private industry lately, and something that we may want to think about going forward.
Yes, certainly. I would say all ideas are on the table.
So that's all that I have.
Thank you, Troy. Heather.
Thanks, Gina. I know that you spent countless hours and columns and rows in Excel to put all of this together and research. I have a couple of questions. First, I will say I'm really glad that we have the opportunity to potentially revisit this in the spring. I think walking before we run is really wise. And, I think about what we said as a board to the community when we talked about, where we were going to be in the, where we in the thirds, and when we were making a vote to put together how we were going to approach this referendum. And we made a commitment to the community that we were looking to be in that upper middle area. And so I'm assuming that this keeps us true to that kind of approach.
It does, based on all the information that I have right now.
Okay. And then, but I do think, I do have concerns, not for today, but just on that longevity piece. Mm-hmm. Not necessarily on the time part of it, although that's an option, but just how are we rewarding people who are staying here and doing excellent work. So I think this is a good start, that the probationary period seems like a natural fit, and I'm supportive of that. But I just think about, kitchen coordinator, for example, is, 50 cents after 2 years is, if you're doing the math on that, mm-hmm. isn't necessarily keeping up with regular inflation, let alone this kind of thing. And so I want to be mindful of that, as I know you already are, but just wanted to say that out loud. And then Troy asked my other question is you obviously had a bucket of money for the hourly wages, so this is staying, we're okay there as well?
We are.
Okay. Okay, yeah, I'm supportive of this, but again, I have concerns about the long-term piece of it, so I'm happy that we can revisit, hopefully in the spring. That's it.
Thank you, Heather. Anna.
I don't really have any specific questions other than thank you for the information. I think this is long overdue, and I'm really thankful that we are sitting at this table having this conversation. And I really hope that this helps to alleviate some of the, the covering that's happening, the additional, getting the people into our schools, the good people that we want with our kids, and taking some of that additional stress and pressure off of people who are in those classrooms. And so I'm really hopeful that this does that job. And like fellow board members have spoken, I also agree that it makes sense for us to revisit this as other districts start to implement things and we start to see where we're at again. And I fully support evaluating ways to encourage and recognize longevity, because that's really one main part of this goal, is to not just attract but retain those folks who have those relationships with our kids. And so I think that's really an important piece, and I look forward to that discussion. So that's really all I had.
Thank you, Anna. Leslie?
First of all, thank you. This is a lot of work, and we really do appreciate it, and I'm sure all of the hourly staff will appreciate this as well. And I have a couple of things. First of all, I want to echo what Troy had said about bonuses. I think that potentially looking at bonuses at a 5, 10, 15-year thing, or something, whether that's monetary or something else, I think is definitely a way that we could look at it. Secondly, I know it says in the paper, in the purple, that we have open positions in paras and in food service. How many positions open, and at what locations do we have open at this point?
Oh, so I have 2 food service positions open, but I don't recall the buildings offhand because we've done a lot of moving around to
Okay.
help cover kitchens. And I would say this food service staff have been absolutely amazing. We have guest person for the day in each of our kitchens, so because they've been moving around to help each other. So I really appreciate over the last 3 years how flexible our staff have had to be. Been absolutely amazing. For paraprofessionals, we do have openings at the high school and the middle school primarily. We do have openings at Prairie View to cover for some staff who are on leave. So we really have openings at almost every grade level for people who are interested.
And the paraprofessional openings, are those specifically special ed paras, or are they regular ed?
We have special ed in all of those places. We also have a part-time position open at the high school in regular education.
Okay.
And so that was a mid-year resignation, which is hard. And actually, we did just have a resignation a week ago. So we'll have another position in regular education open at the high school. And so those can be harder for us to fill. So I don't know if it is the wage rate or the fact that it's part-time. So Mr. Planner and I were talking this morning, now that we have another vacancy, about how to make maybe at least one of those positions more attractive. Hopefully that will help recruit, but I'm hoping that the increase in wages will help as well.
And those being part-time positions, how many hours do they look at, like a week?
The one that we have open right now is 20 hours a week.
Okay. Is that consistent across the board pretty much, or not really?
For our paraprofessionals, it really depends on the position. I would say some of our positions are 5 hours. Most of our positions, K6, are 6.5 hours a day, and 7-12 are 7 hours a day. So the paraprofessionals work the student day, and then they have a half an hour unpaid lunch.
Okay. And then lastly, you talked a little bit about the difference between special ed and regular ed. And I understood some of that before. With special ed, is there additional training, not in like the schedules, but is there additional training they would need to be a special ed para just at that very base level?
So they don't need training in terms of obtaining their licensure to be in special education. Where the training component really comes in, I would say, is from the case manager for the student, because each student needs are different. And so they are working to help the curriculum be accessible to the student. And that is one of the reasons why we moved to a model of paying on education level that's similar to the teacher, because they are helping the students with the instruction component. And so it really depends on the student and their need. And so they do work with the case manager to understand the IEP and help the student to access the curriculum.
Okay.
And so what one student needs might be very different than another. So they receive that one-on-one training from the case manager, which is also why turnover is really hard.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I think that's all I had. Thank you very much.
Oh, yes. Go ahead, Heather.
Somebody was talking about food service, and it reminded me of a question. So this is probably for Andy, I think. But, right, food service is its own bucket of funding, correct? So if this is approved for the coordinator cooks and assistant cooks, does our fund balance support this raise or this change in wages?
So, yes, in the past, historically, the food service wages have been fully supported by the money that's brought in from food service. This wage increase may require a transfer that was included in the referendum from Fund 10 to Fund 50 in order to make that all work. It might not be this year. It might be down the road a year or two. Depends on how much, and we've been very successful actually at maintaining a higher level of participation that we gained over the last year because of the federal government paying for food service for all students. We were actually one of the only districts Sarah has reported that's maintained that higher level of participation compared to other districts that have dropped as they've moved back. And I think a lot of that is attributed to the food service staff and Sarah's leadership in that regard, improving the quality of food and that type of thing. So, and we've amassed a decent fund balance there, but as these wages increase, the question will be whether the increased participation will be able to offset those expenses. And so it'll be kind of be a time will tell type of thing, but we are including some monies in the referendum as had been planned to possibly be transferred into food service in order to support that.
And this is off topic, but since you brought it up, food service is knocking it out of the park. This year, my kids, we go every week. We talk about, are we going to have school lunch or lunch from home? And it's been school, and requests for Swedish meatballs and lefse, or Norwegian meatballs and lefse as a huge hit. So thank you to the food service team and Sarah for her leadership on that.
Great, thank you. I just have two questions. With regards to the analysis, the research, you talked about the market, and it sounds like the market is the education market. More and more companies, especially new companies, and we have a lot of them in Madison, more and more of them are feeding people at work. Do we know what the market looks like outside of education, or is the school year benefit enough to separate that out from the general market for good or for bad?
So in terms of data, I'm comfortable with public sector data because it's for the most part, it's a public record, right? Versus a private sector, they don't need to share it with you. So we do look on things like salary.com. Don't have a way to know how accurate that is or what that really means or if the job titles correspond. But my sense from other people that have family members in food service feel that this is competitive. I do pay attention to things around Oregon and Fitchburg community because when we look at who we employ as our hourly staff, most of our people live in our community, which is wonderful. And so I do pay attention to what area businesses around us are starting their pay. Now, their benefit package could be different, but you will notice a trend in private sector that people are starting to offer more healthcare options, more retirement options as a way to recruit staff. So I really have to pay attention to both.
Secondly, there are a number of districts that are yet to go to referendum in the spring, and we're gonna be looking at this step 2. Is step 2 happening after spring election season? So we would like to start working on step 2 after we complete step 1. For the staff, I would say for me, really that key part is when we have access to the Forecast 5 data. That's the company that puts it all together. It's always behind, right? Because the data, we are all reporting our data in the next month or two. So I always know there's that lag time for the data, but it's still the best data that I have. We also have to report it to DPI, so it's accessible on DPI, but that often isn't available to us until April or May. So we always know that we're a little bit behind, but I would say, the more that we can have things in place before summer, when we really start hiring support staff, the easier it'll be for us to recruit. And so I think we'll have to be doing it all simultaneously. But yes, if other districts do things next April or May, we're certainly going to need to know about that, and we may have to adjust. Are there any in our market that either didn't pass or still have to go that are notable?
Well, the only one that is on my radar right now is Monona Grove. Because when I talked to their HR director last week, they have a number of vacancies and they did not go this year. And so I know they may be looking to do something significant in the spring depending on their budget.
Okay.
But otherwise, I would say the districts that we tend to compare to, those districts did pass. But some of them are saying they're not going to implement any new wage rates until July 1 next year.
Okay. All right. Meaning they may not have vacancies. Possibly.
Right. Or maybe they're doing individual, rates, but they won't do anything like with their whole staff until starting July 1.
Okay. Very good. Okay. Leslie.
On your last question about them not implementing, is that because some of them had already preemptively gone to the 5.93 at the beginning of the year?
They did the 4.7%. Our 5.93 is because we had zero base wage the year before. So yes, those districts did implement a 4.7% July 1 this year.
So previously they had already pretty much
Yes.
gone to where we're trying to retroactively get to.
Correct. So that's my assumption as to why they're looking to do something next July 1st. But as you can tell, this is very fluid process for all of us.
All right. Okay, it's been moved and seconded to accept the proposal that is on the table. Katie, could you please call the roll?
Ms. Bijak? Yes. Ms. Wright? Yes. Ms. Garrison? Yes. Dr. Lakuta?
Yes.
Mr. Pankratz? Yes. Mr. LeBrun?
Yes. Excellent. That proposal passes unanimously.
May I add, so
Yes.
So I really, really appreciate that. So what this means is I did tell the HR staff to be alert for tomorrow. So we're going to start working on this with the goal of us having the retro pay and the wage increases on the December 25th payroll, because it takes a while to do those calculations. So I know when we talked with the paraprofessionals about trying to have this out before winter break, they were all very appreciative of that. So I really appreciate this tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Gina, both to you and Andy. I know that, we kid about the spreadsheets and the analysis, but it's a real thing. And it's been, it was worked on well before we went to referendum and well since then. So thank you for the time you've put into this. All right. Moving on to item number 2 in action items, approval of the 2022-2023 transportation conditions of payment. Andy, can I turn that over to you?
You absolutely can. After the November 8th referendum, we had included an adjustment for our transportation carriers that was reflective of a percentage similar to what we were doing for our support staff at the 5.93. So what you see before you is the conditions of payment, which is a document that we reference when we're paying our contractors. So many of those different things are dependent on occurrences, whether that's picking up the kids on a daily basis for their transportation contract, or doing such things as going to Watertown with a sports trip and that type of thing. So within that document, what we did was we adjusted all the rates of pay that were related to hourly or base cost for the transportation carriers. We didn't change the mileage rate because the mileage rate has actually been adjusted fairly significantly because of fuel prices have increased. Fuel prices, a year ago were in the $3 range for diesel. Today it's right around $5 for diesel. So there is a mechanism within the agreement on a monthly basis for the mileage rate to move up or down based on those fuel costs. And obviously they have moved up significantly over the last year. So what we show you is all the different hourly and again base fee costs increasing. We also changed some of the hourly rates to reflect kind of unique situations where the contractors were having difficulty recruiting drivers to pay for different things that were actually costing the contractors more money than what they having to pay more money than what they were actually bringing in. So some just adjustments. most of those adjustments don't happen very often, but when they did, they were actually impactful to the contractors. So, Mr. Hagstrom and I and Larry Mayo, Director of Safety and Transportation, met a couple times, actually before the referendum in preparation for a hopeful positive referendum result. And so what you have before you is basically that work that we put together and hoping for your consideration this evening.
Anything else, Andy? You want to add to that, or is that?
That is the gist of it. I'll say a couple real quick things. One is going through the conditions of pay. We hadn't touched it for a while. It probably needs some reorganization. It's kind of more of a historical document. There's talk about when different things were implemented, which could have been a decade ago, and it's nice to have that history. But we are thinking that it is time to maybe give it a revision, as well as trying to implement or at least remind some of our contractors some of those obligations that we have related to different DOT requirements and those types of things. So we're looking to kind of clean up the document as far as the language, as well as add some information just so that people are fully aware of the expectations from the state and federal government, as well as us, related to safety and those types of things.
Great. Thank you, Andy. And just as we did before, we're going to get a motion on the table first, and then we will go to discussion. I'll go around the horn just like we did last time. So if I could get a motion to approve the proposal. Heather, thank you.
I'll second.
Troy, thank you. Okay, for discussion then, I'd like to start back over here. Leslie, can we start with you?
Yeah, I have a couple of questions. Some of these are just like on things that I'm wondering about in here. And I guess my first question, honestly, being new to the board, I'm wondering if, not necessarily for tonight's agenda, but is there a way that either you or Mr. Mayo could come and present to the board similarly to the way Mr. Tanner did with the K through 6 and the 7 through 12, to kind of give us a visual of how the busing system works, since it is so unique to our community, and give us a better idea of, your needs and things that going forward might be helping our students.
Yeah, absolutely. We can do that.
Okay. And then, so let's see, I'm trying to find, there's no pages. Towards the back of the document, I guess it's like actually the second to last page, it talks at the very beginning of it, talks about the different trainings, potential different trainings that the bus drivers can do. Is this an exhaustive list, or is this just possibilities that is on here?
This is just possibilities.
Just
it's not
possibilities.
exhaustive
Okay.
By any stretch of the imagination. It's kind of designed, the intent is to have a placeholder for different trainings that may come up related to anything going on in the industry.
And do they have do we do like a training schedule for them, or like are they required so many hours per year, or how does that work?
Yeah, there is no requirement from that perspective from our point of view. The intent is just to create these placeholders, and we are working toward a schedule. The biggest issue that we have is we have to get that kind of set ahead of time, because so many of the drivers have other commitments related to other jobs
Sure.
that they're doing and that type of thing.
Understandable, because they are all part-time positions, correct?
For the most part, yeah.
For the most part, okay. And one of the things I would like to say that I would love to see in future on
Yeah.
here, because I do like some of these things on here a lot, but I'd like to go back to our values and look at maybe giving some equity and equality training on there. I think that would be really good to tie back into where we're looking at as a district going. And then I had a question going back again. Oh, let's see. 1, 2, 3, 4 pages from the back. It's like got snow days, road condition checks. Then it talks about registration. We're not doing a registration anymore. Does that?
That is correct. So we don't utilize that clause anymore. And I debated whether I should take that out or not, because I'm like, well, maybe it'll come back. But yeah, we can definitely clean that up for the next version.
Like I said, I was just kind of going through this and going through. And then it talks about a whole lot of different kinds of buses that I'm really have zero to no information on. So just take this as me being completely naive. How many of each type of bus do we contract for? What does the fleet look like to provide for our schools?
I might actually have Larry help me out with that. Most of them are, or I would assume are DEF buses, which just simply means that it's a way to reduce the impact of diesel fuel exhaust. So you'll see DEF in there quite a bit. That was implemented, and there were cost issues associated with doing that for the contractors that we came up with a kind of a creative way to reimburse them for. But after you get past that, there are most of them I think are around 72 passenger. I'm going to look at the Hagstroms. I got a thumbs up there. That's good. Higher. Oh, higher. Okay, 78, 76. Tell higher, lower. Why do we want to do this?
From 82 passengers, 77, 74.
Okay.
And how many buses do you have?
How many do we have in the fleet?
Yeah, well, that run for the
My
district.
recommendation would be to come down about 7:30. It's hard for me to know.
Yeah, I would say somewhere in that high 20s, 30.
Yeah, I would guess around 30 units.
Yeah.
Thank you. I think that was all of my questions.
Just so you know, we do know that number because we pay them on a monthly basis, but off the top of my head.
I know I kind of caught you off guard right
Yeah.
now. It's fine.
Thank you, Leslie. Anna?
I turn myself off. Sorry. Just a couple of quick questions. Really, I support the 5.93%. I'm glad we're including our bus contractors in this compensation adjustment because they are such a critical part of operating our schools and providing a safe place for our kids to get to and from school. So I just think that this is great. The question, obviously, you prompted a thought of mine when you mentioned the fact that fuel prices have gone up so high. And I'm wondering if we have any anti-idling policies or any encouragement that we are doing to look at that carbon footprint or that reduction in gas consumption, fuel consumption and I understand that, kids are getting on and off the bus, and so maybe we don't want it to get too cold, or maybe it takes more fuel to start the bus up than it does to turn it off and let it not be running. So I'm just curious if that's been talked about or if that's something we're looking at.
Yeah, definitely. I don't think we try to idle buses when it's warm out, especially in the Prairie View Netherwood parking lot. Those buses are typically off, as I recall, until they're ready to go. Like you said, there is a balance there when it's cold out, trying to keep the buses warm. And I'm going to look at the Hagstroms if they have anything else to add there.
I think because our system is so unique that you have a lot of actual owners operating these school buses, it's in our own best interest to shut the key off and not burn more fuel.
Okay.
That's an excellent point, though.
Okay.
The diesel buses, and the way you heat it is by the engine running. So
Yeah.
you have to have them running so that we've actually had calls where people complain that we aren't turning the heaters on in the bus, and that just mind boggles me.
Sure.
And why would I get into a bus in February and not turn the heat on? It's because maybe it hadn't been running long enough and the air coming out is still a little cool.
Sure.
So you have to let them run in order for them to warm up.
Yeah. Okay.
The other thing I'll just share, and we've had many discussions about this, is we are looking at the electric component to school buses that are out there, and there's some significant money that the federal government's putting behind that. We have taken the position that we didn't want to be first, and so we slightly pushed Middleton to try to be first. Unfortunately, they did not win the award for their bus, but trying to remember, there's somebody not far away, like Palmyra, I think, got 3 electric buses. So we have some people to go check out as they do it, and we are interested in being, once it's kind of a proved concept in this area, and everybody knows the pros and cons, we are definitely paying attention to that. The federal program runs for another 4 years, and there's
Is this the carbon reduction program?
it was actually part of the infrastructure project program.
I think it's the CIP
$5
bill.
it was $5 billion. So now that's, I think it was $4 billion for non-polluting, non-carbon, and there was like $1 billion for alternative gas type things. But depending on what you request for, all 5 billion could actually go into electric. So they prioritized rural areas over suburban or city areas, which doesn't exactly make a ton of sense to me from a pollution kind of point of view, but that's what they did. We'll see what the criteria are as we go into the second through the fifth years. But this year was only $500 million, and next year we'll go up to $1 billion or a little bit more in that program. So, and there were schools, like I said, in Wisconsin funded, but they're all rural.
And I do see our policy reflects the fact that we are committed to environmental sustainability and that we offer some incentives, or we want to talk with our bus contractors to make this an option and accessible to them. I fully support that, and it would be great to see some movement, some progress there to get that moving. So otherwise, this is great. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. Mary, would you like to weigh in?
Thank you, Tim. So I am hoping that, Andy, you can refresh my memory as to how the contracts work. I recall having conversations back in the spring that we pay per route. We don't directly pay the salaries of the bus companies. And so I just want to make sure, because I value the collaborative approach that we have with our bus service. The 5.93% increase that we're talking about, is that dedicated to salary money, or does that also include, I know it doesn't include fuel, but are there other fees that might go to? Does that make sense?
Kind of. So, we have, I believe, 12 or 13 contractors. So, and all of them are owner operators. So they are kind of paying themselves in that regard, but they can also have up to 3 other buses or 4 buses total per person that would require them obviously to have employees. And our hope is that they would compensate their employees with the additional funding that we're including here. Now, I will say that some of them may have already included some raises for these folks just because they've had to obviously keep and retain their people. And so part of this might be kind of backfilling that, but we've kind of let that up to the individual owner contractor to make those decisions, knowing that we have to have people to drive the buses even on September 1st. So does that make sense, Mary?
Thank you, Andy. That does take care of it. And is this retroactive again to the start of the 22-23
Yes.
school year?
Yes, absolutely. Just like the employees.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, perfect. Great. Thank you very much. That's all.
Thank you, Mary. Troy.
Okay, so I guess first I just want to say I'm really, really supportive of our transportation contractor arrangement that we have. I think it's something that it's really important to our school district and to our community. I love that it supports small businesses and it supports keeping dollars in our community. I also love that it allows our bus drivers to also be our neighbors, and I think that's really important when it comes to taking care of our children. So I'm fully supportive of this increase and this change to the conditions of payment document. I will say I'm looking forward to reconfiguring the conditions of payment document, as you noted in the purple, just really with an eye toward attraction and retention of our bus contractors to make sure that we can retain this great system moving forward. One thing that does stand out to me is the definition of the daily mileage rate states wages underneath it.
Yeah.
And I think we've kind of commingled the base rate and the daily mileage rate. So it'd be nice to clean that up. And then Regarding some of the other board members' questions on the system, the transportation system itself, we have been bouncing around the idea of bringing this topic to the Vision Steering Committee to do a deeper dive into the conditions of payment revisions. So that might be helpful, I think, to board members to have a dedicated meeting to this topic. And then lastly, I would just say that I'm also very supportive of electric vehicle exploration. And again, happy to see that in our conditions of payment document, and would love to see that come to life someday soon. So that's all I had.
Thank you, Troy. Heather?
I'm also supportive of this. The one question I had, Andy, was around our practice of many years to treat our contractors with similar contractual increases. What other contractors, if any, are there outside of this realm that?
The other contractors that just jump into my mind are our cleaning contractors that we have, evening cleaning contractors. And we've had to kind of adjust their prices over the last year as well, simply because they're trying to find people in this area as well. So we've also moved from one cleaning contractor to kind of another one, simply because the one contractor was really struggling finding people, and we were able to move to a different one that has had more success at that. We currently have both and still in employment of the district, but the one is been able to secure employees better, so we've been shifting a little bit more and more of our buildings to it. But other than that, and consequently, some of the rates are they're actually pretty similar between the two contractors. So,
Okay, that was the only question I had. Thanks.
Okay.
yep.
Thank you, Heather. I don't have any other detailed questions, but I too am wholeheartedly supporting this proposal. We talk about caring and professional educators, and everybody doesn't always think of our bus contractors when you think of caring and professional educators, but they are. They are the first people from our district they see in the morning and the last people they see at the end of the day. And so both ends of that can make a difference in their lives. And so totally supportive. We have a motion and a second on the table. Katie, could you please call the roll?
Ms. Garrison?
Yes.
Mr. Pankratz?
Yes.
Ms. Bijak?
Yes.
Dr. Lakuta?
Yes.
Ms. Wright?
Yes.
Mr. LeBrun?
Yes.
And if
Unanimously? Yes.
I would just like to say a big thank you again to the contractors. We've mentioned it in the agenda item, but the pandemic and everything, they've stuck with us. They've done the best that they can, and we haven't really, we've had struggles here and there, but for the most part, we haven't had some of the struggles that our neighbors have had. And I think that's a clear indication of the professionalism and the community buy-in that we have from our contractors. So heartfelt thanks to them.
Thank you, Andy. Okay, that covers our action items for this evening. We'll move on to our committee reports. We'll start with policy. Heather?
Yep, we are meeting before our next board meeting. So we'll have a bigger update at the next board meeting.
Great, thank you. Vision steering, Troy.
And we are meeting next Tuesday, the 6th at 5 p.m.
Very good. Thank you, Troy. On to information items. Our first information item is the Wisconsin State Report Cards update. I think John Tanner is going to give us an update.
Good evening. All right, so I will kind of walk you through some of these things. So the state report cards come out every year when there's not a pandemic that interrupts everything. And so the state basically takes a variety of measures and gives every district in the state and every school in the state a report card, and it's based on a variety of factors. These were released, we had a secure preview of these back in August, and then they were officially released, September, and then they were officially released to the public last week on Tuesday. So we have a or no, 2 weeks ago on Tuesday, right after the last board meeting. So here's the summary of these. Basically, in summary, we were either meets or exceeds expectations for both the district and all the schools. In general, we did quite well. So these are the overall scores. And I'll tell you in a minute about how that gets determined. These numbers don't mean a whole lot to you on the face of it, except that they're on a 1 to 100 scale. And the state sets the benchmarks, or sort of the cut scores, for what is, exceeds or meets or does not meet, and that sort of thing. On the next slide, I'll just give you a little information about how this is calculated. And it's actually a fairly complex process. The pie shape that you see there is the pie for Oregon School District. So that is how the different components are weighted. There are 4 components to this. One is achievement on state assessment scores on reading and math. So it basically looks at those 2. And those assessment scores are based on the forward test that is given each spring to grades like 3 through 8. Actually, we've got some 10th graders in there too. And then the ACT is actually used as part of that component as well. So the ACT is required for all 11th graders. And so that sort of, people generally think of the ACT as an optional thing. It's not really anymore. The state adopted that as the official assessment for 11th grade students. So that's like back when I was in school, that was optional. It's not now. So every 11th grader in the state takes it. And so that's another portion of the achievement scores. The other part is growth, which is measured year to year comparison. So we look at, how students did the previous year and how they are doing this year, and you measure the growth. Target group outcomes in academic performance within a student subgroup. So this is an interesting one that changed. For those of you who've been around for a while, the state used to look at demographic groups, and they used subgroups for that. And so they would break it out. A couple of years ago, they changed what they did. So actually it was in the 2020-21 school year was the first year they did this. Target group outcomes, they basically take the lowest achieving 25% of students in a year, and then they analyze the growth that those students made into the next year. And that's the target group. So they did that for a few reasons. One, some demographic groups had so few students in the cohort that either they would be identifiable, so they don't report them, or sometimes there would be so few that like 1 or 2 students who would make significant changes or would move in or out of the district would drastically affect that cohort group. So it would make it look like either this entire group of students either made massive improvements or massive slides, and that wasn't really an accurate representation. So they said, okay, we're going to take 25% of each district or 25% of each school. So obviously, if you have the lowest 25% and they make a lot of growth to the next year, you now have a new target group for them. So there's a lot of data tracking that goes through this. But that was one of their ways to have us focus on the students who most need assistance and most need we need to change our system for to make sure that we're meeting their needs. So that's what target group outcomes are in this scenario. And then on track to graduation, because that's a really critical, they use a bunch of different factors like attendance and, achievement scores. 3rd grade reading is a big one, 8th grade achievement and overall attendance. So they use that on track to graduation even at the elementary levels, because there are certain indicators that happen even at the elementary level that are highly correlated to whether a student is going, like 3rd grade reading levels and overall attendance, even in the elementary grades, highly correlated to whether a student is going to graduate from high school. And so they take those into consideration as well. One interesting thing is that these pie chart weights are not the same for every school, depending on the demographic of the school. So, for example, the biggest variation that we see is that if a school has a higher percentage of students who have low socioeconomic status, as measured by students who are eligible for free and reduced lunch, the growth component has a higher weight. So in this case, because we have a fairly low percentage of students on free and reduced lunch in the district, you'll notice that our growth percent is only like a 10.6% weight. Other districts that have a higher percentage of students on free and reduced lunch would have a larger percentage of their total weight would be based on growth. So that's just if you look at the individual school report cards, you'll notice that the pie has different shapes. And in some cases, the target group is absent from it as well because there's so few students in our K4 because we measure 3rd and 4th grade that we would have some other subgroups still that would be identifiable within that target group. So it's an interesting thing. So there's some interesting math behind here. It's not quite as simple as it makes it look on a pie chart. But anyway, those are the 4 basic areas that are calculated. And the basic things that we found for this year is that all the schools either met or exceeded expectations, and the district as well. Overall, the scores improved from the prior year, which is good. And our district score is higher than 84% of Wisconsin school districts. So we almost made it into the top 15%, not quite, but we'll get there. So those are the major themes that we found for this year. And then the question is, okay, but what do we do with it? And so you've kind of already gotten the answer to this question because remember, we developed and presented to the board school goals. Like it was mentioned earlier tonight, Leslie mentioned that we had presentations for both the 4K6 and the 712 on different nights. And so those goals were based on various sources of data. And the results of the report card actually confirm what we had seen in our other data, which is the need for schools to identify target groups in their buildings. And this is not the same target group. The target group the state uses is just the bottom 25 students in the bottom 25% of achievement on math and reading. Our schools, we call them focus areas or focus goals on things that on some other group. And we could adopt that, but every school got to choose based on their area that they wanted to focus on. And we need to develop strategies to meet the needs of those groups. So for example, one school's focusing on emergent bilingual students as a focus group, and so they're focusing a lot of attention on that group because it's an area that they see significant strategic growth for, and we're trying to be equitable with our resources to provide more support for those students who need it. And then another school, for example, is focusing on students with identified disabilities. So that's kind of how we're doing it. And so we're continuing pursuing those school goals that were shared in October, and it aligns really well to meet the growth needs that we see as identified by these state report cards. So I guess, what questions do you have about any of that? I know that kind of threw a lot at you, so I'd be happy to try to answer any questions you have.
We can just open it up to the group. And if that doesn't work, I'll call on you. Heather, you want to start?
Yes, okay. Thank you for walking us through this. My one question you kind of answered, but I was going to say, where are we historically? I kind of wanted to see a side by side, but good to know that we're improving. That's good. It would just be interesting to see where we've been and where we are now. But my other question is so you've talked about how this is used internally. Is this used externally in any way, shape, or form? Is anything tied to it from an external standpoint? Oh, do I?
Oh, I'm sorry.
That way 2 of us can have it. It's not really. It's a way to let the public easily identify how we're doing.
Right.
And so it's basically it is an external measure. It's easily understood. So real estate agents like to use it when they're marketing places. That's probably the most obvious way that I can say that it's used. And we use this as a system impact measure. And that is sort of internal, but it's also global, because the point here is not to say that there are students who are deficient in any way. The point is to say that our system is designed to get exactly the results that it gets. And so if there are certain groups that aren't meeting, like, we need to change our system. And so that's being responsive to what we see here, both in terms of overall achievement and when we look at either that target group as defined by the state or the focus groups that we have. So we look at our system impact on all the students. So we keep changing the students, or keep changing our system and designing systems differently to meet the needs of all students. But that's the major impact. Externally, though, people do compare things.
Sure. And on that note, I guess, at least in the pie chart example that you showed, knowing that might deviate or does deviate for different schools, it looks like almost 40% is on test taking, right? So there's an element of, just like if you take an ACT and you're not a good test taker, that might affect your ranking from a global perspective on our score.
Yep, that is one of the limitations of this data, is that it is basically almost entirely assessed on one or two, well, each student takes one, like, large scale standardized assessment. And that's why we want to take it. We don't want to make really high, like, there, we use this as a global, and that's just because for efficiency, for state accountability, we like to use this in conjunction with other measures. So that's why when we look at the focus goals that we made for students, we have different ways of measuring that. For example, we will not just measure the growth of one of our focus groups based on the forward test that happens once a year, because we can't really do much about it since it's administered late in the school year. Instead, we'll do other things like formative assessments that we've developed, or assessing students reading ability, or we'll look at reading fluency, we'll look at math, we'll do like the STAR test, which is also a computerized standardized assessment, but unlike the forward, it actually gives a real good breakdown of an individual student's strong points and growth areas that can provide customized data for the teacher to use, like, the next day to customize instruction. And so that's a lot more usable. But yeah, this one is kind of a limited, this is basically look at it's that satellite data. It's
Sure.
Satellite, not even map, not street at all. It's very much satellite data.
And also has nothing to do with if we offer a wide variety of foreign language or music or any sort of breadth of.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, they added, actually, on the high school report cards only, they now add in an indicator of how many students completed I think it's art, dance, music, and theater course, but it has nothing to do with the scores. It's just there for informational purposes. So yeah, it's really looking at a narrow area, just a real foundational couple of areas.
And then my last question, because I guess I'm pretending I'm a realtor tonight. I don't know. I looked at ICOMS is the kind of one outlier that doesn't exceed expectations. Any commentary, or I guess I don't know where the school was before, but any commentary on that?
Well, we dove into that. So I will say that across the board, middle school tends to be where students kind of like ebb off a bit. You can sort of see a decline statewide. When you look at scores, it's like third is a little bit higher than fourth, and then fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth, things tend to go down. So that's pretty typical of middle schools in general, where students start to explore their individuality, and we see a little bit more disengagement. And thankfully that goes back up in high school, just across the board. So, there was a little bit of an anomaly last year for 8th grade. And so we've started to dive into that and take a look at what that might be. So we're working on that with Jorge, Principal Avalos, to take a look at what we can do a little bit differently. And we're also tracking those students into 9th grade now with some of those more diagnostic assessments, just to make sure that, the students, through the pandemic, that was a difficult time, especially socially for middle school students when they're trying to establish social relationships and all those peer influences are really heavy and being disconnected. I think we had it was just a hard time. And so now we have students and we want to make sure they're supported. So we're being reactive in the sense that we're tracking those students a little bit more in the 9th grade. So we've gone and met with high school teachers to say, hey, what are you seeing about these students who didn't do that well last year? What do you notice? And we've found some areas where they could be a little bit stronger, and we've tried to provide some supports for them to make sure that that they do bounce right back up. We've also looked at some things for the 8th grade and say, hey, what happened here? Was there anything different? Can we do anything different? So we're looking at, again, designing our system differently to make sure that we're having students be successful. So it was a little bit of an anomaly, but statewide, 7th and 8th, 6th, 7th, 8th grade, it's always a slide.
Yes, Leslie.
So mine isn't exactly on this, but it's close. It's so the media will talk a lot about learning loss, and I know that this doesn't specifically speak to that, but when you take a look at this and you correlate what the wider media is saying about, America's kids, where do you see us as a district as far as that learning loss piece? And are we able to catch those kids that did have learning loss, or did we overall as a district do fairly well?
That's difficult to say. I mean, overall, it's the difficulty is that we're looking at such a big aggregate. So I would say that as an aggregate, like we're almost back to where we were in like 2018-19, because we did go down during the pandemic. And so we're better than we were last year. We're not quite back to where we were in 2018-19. The difficulty, the big asterisk on saying that is that the state report cards changed their calculation method in 2020. So at the same time, like we were anticipating a different calculation method that was going to happen for 2020. Well, we ended up not even taking the tests in 2020 because of the pandemic. So now when we try to look back and make a comparison between now and before, it's not exactly an apples to apples comparison because that method changed. So it's a little bit difficult to really make that comparison to where we were. So it's difficult to compare us to ourselves before that. We look pretty similar to a lot of the other other schools in the state, and I'd say that we were a lot more stable than a lot of places were nationally. With that said, there are individual pockets that are different. So there are some, like for some grade levels and some subjects, we actually went up, like during the pandemic, where like most of the state went down. And there are other areas where we pretty much remained flat and others we went down. But it's really interesting because there are differences between schools. There's differences so there's greater variability within schools than there is between like us as a district and other districts. And that's actually always true. There's a lot of research that says that the variability between teachers in a single school is always much greater than the differences between schools in the district or between schools in different districts, which is kind of weird. Like you don't think of that, but we've known that for a long time. And so I think this is one indicator of that. Well, I'd say in general, we're pretty similar to the rest of the state and the nation, really the world. I'd say we were probably better than most. We didn't see quite the drop that a lot of other places did.
And then, so you were talking about the different districts and the similarity between different districts and stuff. Would you say that the districts that are in our area are all fairly equal, in all, in looking at that? Or is it more like a regional kind of thing? Or is it really just depends on the district?
It's, we're pretty similar with most of the other Dane County districts. I mean, it does tend to be regional, and it tends to be linked to socioeconomic status. There's an article I read today that said that was actually probably a really big factor. It was out of the New York Times that said that socioeconomic status of students was actually as big or bigger a driver than the time out of school. So if you had two different districts that had exactly the same time in or out of school, the one with the lower SES students, fell behind farther, and the one that didn't fall as far behind. So there's a lot of other factors, but so given that, you would expect that the regional differences between like Dane County being economically similar to all the most of the districts being fairly similar to each other would be a little bit different. Districts like Madison that are more urban, that have a different demographic and different socioeconomic status as far as like percent of students on free and reduced lunch, you're probably going to see a different a little bit of a different take there.
Okay, so if to any random parent in this district, you would say though overall that our kids are faring fairly well as far academically coming out of the pandemic then?
Yeah, we're pretty similar to others with probably a better, I think, resilience and probably a quicker ramping back up of things that people missed for whatever reason.
Thank you.
Any other questions for John? Anna?
Just a quick comment, kind of piggybacking a little bit on Heather's comments. This is one piece of data. It's great to see that we are in an exceeds expectations category. That feels good, right? We want to see that in our district, but it's just one component of what makes our schools great and what makes this a great place to learn, and what just the breadth and depth of what is offered in this district, and just focusing so much on a test score that a kid takes on a single day in that grade, and then using that to establish where we are is seems a little silly. At the same time, I also recognize that we're finding value from it, right? We're looking at some big picture things, and we're able to kind of make some decisions on things. And again, it's a feel-good thing, but I just really appreciate the fact that we focus more on different assessment styles for our kids, and different, so much more focus on the individual and all of the learning opportunities that are available to kids in the district. So it's just one small piece of a bigger picture of what our district really represents and offers. So I just wanted to throw that comment out there.
Thanks, Anna. Any other questions? Troy?
I don't have much to say here, but just emphasize what Anna just said. I'm looking at the graphic that's kind of hidden there, but it's the learners that are running, and a tiered approach to promote growth in every learner while aiming to close gaps. It's one of my favorite graphics, and that's really what's most important to me. This other stuff, yeah, it's a feel good, makes us all feel good, but glad that we're looking beyond it. So thanks, John.
Yeah, I too. I think the school report card, considering when it comes out, is more of a validator than anything else. Will we do anything differently than what we already plan to do? Probably not. And so I would agree that it is one element, more of a validation element in my opinion, because it is so satellite view, as you put it, John. I so much more appreciate what came to the table with the 4K through 6 and 7 through 12 plans, because we were way ahead of the curve. We knew where we were at. We put our plans in place, and we're working our plans. This is just validating that we're on the right path. So thank you. I appreciate all the time you've put into this.
Thank you.
Right.
And I just wanted to say thank you as well. You had clarified my questions without having to have me ask them. So I appreciate that. And I'm going to sign off for the evening.
Mary, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to check back in with you. I apologize. So thank you for chiming in. All right. You have a great evening.
Okay. You too. Bye-bye.
Okay. Thank you again, John. And we're on to visioning and strategic planning. Back to Leslie.
Hello, everybody. Visioning and strategic planning will be very short because we have a little bit of information to share with you related to the teaching and learning update. So just to return to our framework with the understanding that we are moving through it all the time. And a lot of what you're seeing tonight related to the school report cards, the reference to the action goals and the action plans, all of that is here on the strategic framework. And everything that we're talking about tonight, whether it be compensation, or it is school report cards, or it is the English language arts curriculum adoption process that we're about to describe to you. All of those things are tied back to the priorities that you set when we were together last spring for the next 3 to 5 years. So, in the spirit of that, I am going to ask our Assistant Director of Learning and Student Achievement, Darcy Krieger, to come up and share with you a little bit about the curriculum resource process that we have been using in order to continue to provide the very best possible English language arts instruction we can. Go right ahead.
Is it on? Okay, good. All right, so I am super excited to share with you what we've been doing in ELA for about the last year and a half. And so the purpose of my informational update is simply twofold. First, to provide context, I'll walk you through a little bit of the journey that we've gone through that included a standards review. We had about 18 people volunteer for a review and planning committee, and we have 34 teachers currently doing a pilot of our curricular resources that we've selected. And the second thing that I want to do is just provide specificity on what we're doing as a result of that work that I just sort of described. And what we're doing is we are piloting 2 different resources. One is called Wonders, and one is called EL Education. So our work started before 2020, but in 2020, we really started to pay attention to the 2 key shifts that the DPI came out with respect to ELA. And you can see the 2 key shifts here. A little clarification. I know key shift 1 is pretty self-explanatory, which is learning about and application of reading, writing, speaking, listening, and language emphasizes recognizing, valuing, and sustaining student identities and the identities of others. Key Shift 2 talks about how students are flexible users of the English language, and really that's talking about are students able to meet the varying demands of things like their audience, the task, the purpose, the discipline. So are they effective in their reading selections, writing, word choice, and how they're speaking and listening depending on the task at hand. Another one of our focuses has been to really work on the foundational skills of our students, and foundational skills is things a lot of times we think about things like phonics and phonemic awareness. So we've noticed that it's an area where we really need to work on explicit and systematic instruction. And so we've been spending a lot of time focusing on how we can build that in a way that's most meaningful and authentic for our kids. So we developed a 3-year plan for our foundational skills development here in Oregon. And you can see that last year in 21-22, we hoped to begin a letters training for our teachers in grades K2. Letters is language essentials for teachers of reading and spelling. And it's meant to build capacity in teachers for how to teach explicit and systematic phonics instruction. It's not a program, it's really a learning opportunity. The next thing that we did last year was we learned about the new ELA standards. We also spent time with our review and planning committee to evaluate our current curriculum, what we were using against the new standards, against those shifts. And so the job really of that team was to determine, are we going to take the time to enhance our current curricular resource, or are we going to replace it? And so through a series of activities, we chose to replace it. And that's where we're at this year in our pilot. Last year, we also did our interventionist piloted phonics interventions so that we could determine one phonics intervention that we could be using consistently across the district K4. So this year, I should say, first of all, I should have said this in the beginning, and I apologize. Kim White was supposed to be here with me. She is our coordinator, our ELA coordinator, and she's under the weather tonight, and she was incredibly instrumental in working on this as well as the whole team. So she's not here tonight, but she's here in spirit. So now, then I'll tell you about this year now. So this year we are continuing that letters training for our teachers in grades K2. So far we have run 2 cohorts. It's a really extensive, about 55-hour training for teachers. And last year we began cohort 1, but because of the way that our professional development days landed, we just kind of had to push it out. So that first cohort is finishing up on the January in-service day. And then our second cohort will be finishing up at the end of this year. We are also in the midst of piloting our ELA curriculum. Right now, we are piloting both Wonders and EL. We are also training our intervention teachers in Sunday, which was the phonics intervention that we adopted. And we hope to start training the trainers in letters. However, teachers have to be through all 4 units of the 55-hour training prior to being trained as a trainer. So we haven't even asked for volunteers yet who want to do that. When you look into next year, we are excited to be implementing a new ELA curriculum and then begin training grades 3-8 in phonics and word study, which is similar to letters. And we're also really hopeful, we're confident that the ELA curriculum that we're going to choose is going to have training that's embedded within the curriculum itself. And then in 2024-25, all teachers in K5 will be teaching and assessing the new curriculum and the skills from curriculum and using the letters training to help evaluate the curriculum that we're using and then enhance further. Okay, so this is just, I think I talked through all this, but I'll remind you. So last year we began letters. We reviewed our current resource and we determined it to not be in alignment with the new shifts. We adopted a new intervention phonics curriculum, and we worked with CISA in order to understand the shifts, which is something I didn't talk about earlier. Is we contracted with our CISA 2 people to walk us through the shifts in a systematic way that we can use to replicate. So as we're looking at our new curricula that we're piloting, we can use the CISA training to help us evaluate in a similar way so that we can make sure that we're making the best decision. So here we are in year 2, another universal curriculum that we purchased this year for all teachers, and this includes our 4K partners through 2nd grade, is Heggerty, which is a phonemic awareness curriculum that helps teachers embed phonemic awareness and phonemic awareness skills into the entire day, so it's cross-curricular. Letters cohort 2 has begun. Interventionists are using Sunday, and we are conducting a pilot. So you may be wondering, maybe not, how did we pick the 2 curricula that we chose to pilot? So the first thing that we did is we selected just a universal determination rule on which resources we were going to dig further into. The rule that we used was we took a look at ed reports, and we took any of the curriculum that were suitable for K5 that were all green, so that they would meet all the shifts in every area, plus they met things like teacher usability, variability, and complexity of text. So we didn't want to select any, we didn't want to look further into any curricula if it wasn't rated all green on ed reports. So we came up with 11 different series that we could look at. And after that, Kim and I set up meetings with all of the publishers of the 11 companies and had meetings with them. We ordered in samples of all the products. We looked through them. And then once there were a couple that we could take out right away just because of things like the value of reading on their students reading on their own, the way that the series was set up and how it didn't go along with our language, our ELA values and beliefs. But after that, we kind of took a modified version of the NYU scorecard for culturally competent reading materials and gave them to our coaches who had our instructional coaches who had the opportunity to go through, I think we had like 4 or 5 different curricula left, and we gave the scorecard to the coaches and had them go through the whole experience with the publishing companies and the samples so that we could narrow it down to our point was to get down to 2 or 3 curricula to pilot. We ended up with 2, a very solid 2 that we're really confident with with either one. And we then selected the review team, or our pilot team, based solely on interest. We asked teachers who is going to be interested to pilot. It's a really, really large undertaking for teachers because they have to be familiar with a whole new curriculum and just a structure and temper of their day. And we're asking them to do it twice because we want each teacher to have a feel for each of the series so that teachers aren't kind of attached to one or the other, and then we get into this kind of struggle. If I piloted Wonders and I really like it, or I took a ton of time piloting EL, so that's the only one I'm going to vote for. So that's where we are right now. We selected units that are based on, am I in the next slide already? Maybe. We selected the units so that they're completely aligned with our scope and sequence anyways. So a student in a pilot classroom who's getting a Wonders curriculum right now is getting the same essential standards as students who are not in the Wonders pilot. So we wanted to be confident that our kids were getting the same standards and that we were working in the same scope and sequence. It's going well, but it is a lot of work. We are hoping to have a decision made by March because pilot goes through second quarter, and then third quarter teachers will flip their resource to the new resource or the other resource. That's all I have.
Okay, that's a lot of information. Maybe I will start just to get the ball rolling. You mentioned that the ELA standards changed. Can you give me an example? This is such a nebulous thing for me. Can you give me an example of how a standard changed?
So the standards themselves didn't change. If I said change, I apologize. There were shifts in the standards. So if you go back, Leslie, or who's got the clicker, to slide 28. So these are just the shifts. These are the areas that we want to put our focus on. So if you take a look at Key Shift 1, we really want to ensure that we're providing the types of materials that sustain student identity and the identities of others. So we want to provide, you've probably heard people say that we want our curriculum to provide windows and mirrors and sliding glass doors for kids. So, I will. So when we provide those types of things for kids, a window is something that we can see through, right? We don't see ourselves reflected in it, but we can see through to someone else. We can understand how somebody else might be, existing. A mirror is shining it back at us so we can see ourselves reflected in the curriculum. And sliding glass door is a way that while the person or what we're looking at may not be exactly like ours, they're fully accessible by opening the sliding glass door.
That's a great example. That does help me understand. Just an example of how things are shifting or how we are focusing on a particular shift.
Sure.
So that's very helpful. It's obviously an enormous effort. We have 34 teachers who are really piloting 2 different options, which takes a lot of work. One takes a lot of work. How often do we decide to do this?
We have not done a curricular adoption in ELA, I believe, in 6 years.
Perhaps more. Mm-hmm.
And is that typical? Is that
Yep.
This new material lasts for X amount before we start looking at, hey, what's new in this space?
Well, in a curriculum revision cycle, John and I are working on firming that up right now, but it is in general a 6-year cycle, but it's constant revision and enhancement throughout the course of the 6 years. But Yeah, this time it was time to do a complete replacement.
Okay, thank you. Does anybody else have questions for Darcy? Troy?
So Darcy, I have someone at home that talks a lot about this stuff, so I hear a lot about it. Could you talk a little bit more about phonics? So it seems like the past few years there's been a greater implementation of phonics in the curriculum. Could you just briefly talk about the research behind that and why that is?
Sure. So what I think what you're asking, and if I'm not getting this right, you tell me, is what the science of reading has told us about systematic and explicit instruction in things like letter understanding, the way that the alphabetic works, like patterns in words, CVC patterns, which is consonant, vowel, consonant, how we know how to decode the language so that we can explicitly define how to decode the language so that students can become more fluent and automatic readers. Is that what you're looking for?
Yes, perfect. Yep, and I loved what you said earlier about kind of pushing phonics across all different subjects and making it a part of the entire student's day. So that was great. On the pilot, so 34 teachers. I'm trying to calculate how that's a very high percentage of all of our teachers at a couple of grade levels, right?
We have every grade level represented in the pilot, K-5, with the exception we had a third grade team recently drop out, but they're still reviewing the materials. But every first grade teacher in the district wanted to pilot. We didn't set any limits on who could or who couldn't pilot. We just kind of laid the information out there and found out who was interested in piloting.
Wow, that's awesome. Thank you to all of those pilot teachers. I guess the other question I had is on the letters training. So are all of our teachers, our K-6 teachers going through letters training, that 55-hour training?
So right now it is K2 on a voluntary basis. So when we determined that we were going to do this, we wanted to build in a sustainability piece to it as well. And so since it is a really lengthy training and it's offered by an outside group, sustainability was kind of it was a little pickle that we had to solve. And so the solution of that comes in the Train the Trainers, which it comes in year 2. So what we're hopeful to be able to do is to train trainers so that we have in-house experts that can offer the learning at different times throughout the course of the year.
Great. Awesome. I guess my final question is just the budgetary impact. I assume this is will be a significant investment once we make the switch. And my assumption is we have rollover dollars that we've been planning to use to implement this, correct?
Correct. It also is, if there's any ESSER money left, it's evidence-based curriculum that we can use to meet all of our to meet the needs, the requirements of us spending ESSER dollars.
Great. Thank you, Darcy. That's all I have.
Heather?
Thank you. Move back over now that I'm not looking at the computer. Old eyes. One, thank you for walking us through this. I have a first grader, so I've been hearing about Wonders. Shout out to Ms. Vitale and the other first grade teachers at FES for their newsletters and bringing parents along. When the 34 teachers are done reviewing both options, how will the decision be made?
So along the way, I told you earlier that we worked with CISA 2. So we have the same cover sheets that we use to evaluate our current curriculum, which is, it gives us a sort of a quantifiable score on each of the curricula. So we'll use those as a start, and then it will be the quantifier of the NYU scorecard that we adapted. So we'll get basically a score for each of the curricula. And then if there's a tie, which I think would be highly unlikely, then we'll lean on our me and Kim, our coordinator of ELA, to make the final call.
Sure. My other question was, are the kids aware of this so much as, do they know it? But is there a negative or a learning loss, or is there something in this year of adjustment as we are, exploring two different curriculum to that kids who are versus kids who aren't? What does that
that's
look like?
one of the things that we were really careful and crafted this in a very different way so that we could ensure that kids weren't getting more or less than other kids. They'll be getting it potentially differently,
Sure.
and in a more maybe like when I think about K2 and foundational skills, which is phonics and phonemic awareness, I think our new piloted series will be a more aligned delivery of those skills, but we are being really cognizant of sticking to our scope and sequence, which we've spent a lot of time developing and understanding to make sure that when the kids are in a pilot, whatever curriculum they're using or curricular resource they're using, the standards are the same and the students are receiving the same instruction.
Gotcha. I have all of my snap words memorized, so I've got that down.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
No questions, but other than I really appreciate this update of the work that you've been doing for a year and a half to evaluate this. I think that this is a good, I fully support what these key shifts are looking to do as far as making sure that we have curriculum that does have windows, mirrors, and sliding doors. So I just think that's great. Thank you for that explanation, and thank you for all of the educators that are taking on this additional effort to do this. I mean, that's a huge undertaking. It's a ton of work, and I think none of us in this room even knew this was happening. And here these teachers are doing all of this additional work, and it's just so important for us to be aware of that, and I'm just so appreciative. So thanks.
Anybody else? Thank you, Darcy. Leslie.
Thank you. That was really fun to be able to share that information and the good work that's being done by Darcy Krieger, Kim White, and all of the teachers who are involved in this. And just so that you know, math teachers in grades 6 through 8 are doing the same thing. So they are knee deep in the similar process. And that's just, they do those things because of their commitment to offering the very best. And I really, really appreciate that. So now for our superintendent's report. I don't know how many of you knew this, but November 18th was our Substitute Educator Day. And so many thanks to all of the people who are guest teachers within our school district, and many of them have become OSD family members right alongside us because they're in our schools every single day. So they contribute immensely. Our students love the substitutes that they get to see on a regular basis throughout their school. They really are a part of the school family. Winter sports seasons are underway. We've hosted our first home boys and girls basketball games, and hockey is home this Friday night. Wrestling opens up at home on December 16th, and boys swim starts in January. There are 197 student athletes who are registered to compete this season and 17 student managers. A total of 36 home winter events before playoffs. So there are a lot of opportunities for all of us to come out and show our support for Panther athletes. Our Netherwood students, they had an opportunity to go to the Kickback Cafe. 4th grade Netherwood students, we had 9 of them who were there to read their shared stories and poems to a full house at the cafe. And this is from Mrs. Zesh, who organized the event for these very dedicated 4th grade students. And then we had the food drive donation. This was so cute. Students at Forest Edge, Brooklyn, and Netherwood recently participated in a food drive and donated 1,074 pounds of food to Oregon Area Food Pantry. The food drive was coordinated by our own AmeriCorps Farm to School specialists. Netherwood art class. This was another really fun and important activity. Fourth grade students in Mrs. Prahl's art class at Netherwood recently engaged in a unit about henna, a form of body art. Students learned about the origins of henna and its uses from Netherwood administrative intern Mrs. Rock. And they also were able to create their own henna designs on paper, and the unit culminated with the visit from a henna artist who provided students the opportunity to have the designs then painted on their hands. Next, we have our Badger Conference Honors Band. Look at all the people, all our students along the wall looking mighty spiffy. They were a part of an ensemble conducted by Dr. Alexander Gonzalez, and this ensemble was composed of 87 outstanding student musicians from across all 12 Badger Conference schools. 11 Oregon high school students took part in this. They spent 2 days rehearsing and had a fantastic performance last week at the Verona Area High School Performing Arts Center. So we had JoJo Briggs on the flute, Jake Chung on the trumpet, Rylan Clark on tenor saxophone, Aaron Dieter on percussion, Philip Emmerich on the horn, Elliot Lesperance on percussion, Lee McComb on clarinet, 2 different kinds of clarinet, Abby Sargent on clarinet, Samantha Schroeder on flute, Alex Seitler on percussion, and Nathan Shippey on oboe. The OHS Technology Department, you can see pictures of them hard at work here. And Mr. Stace, his class is hard at work and they're using brand new tools. Mr. Stace was able to purchase the new tools with funds he received from writing a grant for Harbor Freight Tools. It was a $250 grant. And he was sponsored for a contest through Fetch Rewards for another $1,500. So we were able to buy 2 DeWalt oscillating multi-tools, 2 DeWalt random orbital sanders, a DeWalt brand nail gun, a wood burning and etching kit, 4 sets of breaker bars for automotive class, 1 heat press used for making awards, mugs, shirts, etc., 10 wire stripping tools, and a gallon of epoxy. So thank you, Mr. Stace, for making that extra effort, because of what he did, he's able to offer even better experiences to the kids. And then OHS ceramics class. That looks like fun, doesn't it? The students in Ms. Coutret's ceramics class discover that all that clay has to offer from the wheel and hand building techniques. Each day, students develop a solid understanding of skill, the potential for creativity, and appreciation of how to transform a ball of earth into a masterpiece through the medium of clay. This exercise stretches the minds in many important ways. Part of what you were all referring to recently when you said that the report card only measures certain things, right? Yeah, the superintendent's report has been full of the things that are not measured in our report card. And then our home construction classroom, oh, lucky for them, they are not.
OCA Media Sports is proud to bring you this special broadcast of Friday Night Live. Tonight, the Panther boys basketball team hosts the Monona Grove Silver Eagles in this regional playoff game. This broadcast is made possible with financial support from our generous sponsors. One Community Bank, Feel Good Banking, now with 11 locations to serve you. One Community Bank is a proud supporter of youth athletics. Visit us at onecommunity.bank, member FDIC. The Village of Oregon, a great place to live, work, and play. The Oregon Athletic Booster Club. Please consider being a part of your athlete's success and become a booster today. Torhorse Insurance, a proud sponsor of Oregon Athletics. At Torhorse Insurance, our number one goal is to deliver customers the peace of mind that comes with having the right coverage at the right time. The Oregon Chamber of Commerce. Stoughton Health, providing safe, quality health care with exceptional, personalized service. The Oregon School District, actively building competency, character, culture, and community. J.L. Richards, providing fresh meats, deli salads, seafood, and quality Wisconsin cheese for over 25 years. Try our delicious hot lunches, dinners, or our Friday fish fry. Catering available throughout Dane County. Logo Promotions, helping businesses and schools promote and advertise their organizations with quality apparel. Providing exceptional, personalized service with quick turn times. Logo Promotions for all your screen printing and embroidery needs. Serving the Madison area since 2013.
Thank you for the hydration station.
Thank you for the new soccer bags.
Thank you for the scorer's table.
Thank you, boosters.
This is a presentation of OCA Media Sports.